for being with us, and thank you. Welcome to the 423rd regular meeting of the Environmental Quality Commission. As Chair George says, I'll start with this. DEQ's mission is to be a leader in restoring the quality of Oregon, air, land, and water. I know that we're just coming out of our executive session. Just as we start, I want to turn it over to Dr. Felden to go ahead and see if there are any adjustments.
Rosso, I don't think we have any adjustments to our agenda at the time on my end. Sue, and otherwise.
I don't need to take it. I see all commission members present, and Chair George is now with us for a moment. But here, I'll go ahead and action item A. Have draft meeting minutes. Commission members had a chance to review the draft meeting minutes and to act on.
I second. My apologies. You could move the microphone a bit closer. I think we're just a little bit of trouble hearing on Zoom. Thank you, and we will work with our audio as best we can in this hybrid meeting environment.
And Commissioner Addington, you might not have heard us, but we were just seeing whether all commissioners had a chance to review the draft meeting minutes. Commissioner Kyle had made a motion to approve the draft meeting minutes, seconded, and we were just taking.
Yes, Sam, the audio is really tough right now. It's pretty faint, but yes, I've looked at it. Did we vote, or is that what you're asking?
We all in the room here just said aye. We did vote, but well, for now, until we get it figured out, I'll just ask fellow commission members here and present in the room to speak louder. Can you hear us now, Greg?
It's better. It's better.
We have some technology limits that are making it a little bit tricky on our system today. See what we can do, and perhaps we will definitely try to change it over break, but if not before. The microphones are on. Basically, the in-room audio is running through the telephone.
Yeah, it just cuts out a little bit and is a little bit faint.
Okay, so I think we were just taking Commissioner Slusher and Commissioner Kyle and I all voted yes, aye on approving. Sounds like you did as well.
Aye.
Okay. All right, motion is approved, or the meeting minutes are approved. Thank you. Let's go ahead and move on to our informational item. The second item on our agenda, an informational on the director's recruitment.
Hello, hopefully you can hear me. And really, I am here to help answer some questions, but wanted to give Commissioner Kyle a chance to speak first. Anything you want to relate to our director recruitment?
If it is the mic, and I'll have to just talk really loudly. So is that okay? Great. Can I get a thumbs up? Can you hear me? Perfect. Okay. So I think the summation that was provided in the meeting notebook kind of covers the highlights. The original application was open in mid-October. We did extend it to November 13th. I feel like we do have a pretty good pool, so the application period is now closed. We're in the process of reviewing the pool of candidates and kind of.
Absolutely. So as Commissioner Kyle said, we have about 20 candidates that will move through an initial screening. We have a questionnaire, and we'll do some scoring of those candidates. and kind of determine who moves to the first round of interviews. So we're holding time in mid-December for that. And then kind of from there, I think the commission will determine sort of who makes it to the final round. The commission will vote on that, and they will hold some interviews and make that final decision probably in February. So those are, I mean, that's pretty much, it's a fairly straightforward process. We will be consulting with the governor in January, and I don't think there's anything else. We meet weekly to discuss process and just where we are with candidates. Have really done a lot of recruitment, really trying to invite in as many people as possible.
So Commissioners, and Kathleen, and your vote of confidence in weigh in or have a conversation, happy. Where we are in the process at any time. Review, I think we've made them transparent. A little bit longer than we had hoped. But it's a process.
One other thing, we have developed a list of sort of final interview questions. We put that out for public comment. So we will have an opportunity for the public to weigh in on the kinds of final. We will also have, as part of, once the commissioners have decided on their final group of candidates, there will be some opportunities for others to participate in some of the screening process for that final decision, although just to be really clear, it is a final and permanent director for you.
Excuse me.
We got Chair George with a question. We're still trying to tease out the audio.
Okay,
Go ahead.
thank you. If you don't hear me, Sam, just wave, because I know audio is coming in and out for me. I think Nancy mentioned that the interview questions have been developed, but I wasn't quite sure, and forgive me if this is a repeat, but I believe that those are out for public comment right now, and those can be found on the recruitment website. And so if anybody is interested in providing input on those questions, please go ahead and do that. I think comments are due on November 28th. Thank you.
I know we're still teasing out the audio issues. I'm thinking, given that, Stephanie, given that our next agenda item is coming up and we're gonna have Colin McConaughey and Nicole as presenters, I'm wondering if there's anything we can do to bring the audio closer to them so that folks in the public can make sure the entirety of that I'm presenting before we have our back and forth.
Let's take a 5 minute.
Maybe let's do that so we can tease that out. Thank you, Director Feldman. Let's take a 5-minute recess so we can tease out the audio real quick before we jump into our next agenda. We're moving on. We're continuing with action item B, climate protection program, temporary rules. So welcome, Colin and Nicole. I hope you all better.
Close, hopefully so. Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Colin McConaughey. I manage our Office of Greenhouse Gas Programs, and we have Nicole Singh, our Senior Climate Policy Advisor, with me as well today. As the slide indicates, we're before you with a proposal for a temporary rulemaking pertaining to Division 271, the Climate Protection Program rules. I don't have control of the slides, do I? Slide, please, Stephanie. So we'll identify the issue that we are seeking to address through this temporary rulemaking and provide a justification for why we believe this temporary action by the Commission is warranted, share some public comment and information we received from stakeholders, during the process of developing this proposal and conclude with a recommendation to the EQC for how we're proposing you choose to act on this proposal. But I'll start with a refresh on the Climate Protection Program. I believe we are just 1 day shy of 11 months since the Commission adopted the Climate Protection Program, which I think is enough time to warrant a little overview of this program before we dive right into the proposed action. Next slide, please. What you see here may look familiar. This is a diagram we showed early and often throughout our rulemaking process and to the Commission as we briefed you throughout that rulemaking process, which was really through calendar year 2021. And this was informed by a lot of work that we did before going into that rulemaking, a lot of work, what we call our scoping phase in 2020, in which we solicited and received thousands of comments from the public, from stakeholders, on how they would like to see the agency shape this ambitious new climate program. And what shook out in that outreach were these three priorities. It was really remarkable once we sifted through all those comments, how 99% of those comments expressed concern or importance that really shook out into at least one of these, if not two or three of these areas here: reducing greenhouse gas emissions, promoting equity, and containing costs. Really, almost every comment could be bucketed into at least one of those three. And so that really drove into the rulemaking process how we approached proposals, and this is a very multifaceted program, and at each point really considered, looked at each facet through these three lenses here. Next slide. So at its core, what the Climate Protection Program is establishes mandatory and declining limits on the greenhouse gas emissions that are allowed to occur from the use of fossil fuels throughout almost every part of Oregon's economy, with the exception of electricity generation. So the use of fossil fuels from residential sector, commercial, industrial, institutional, really, again, almost every use of fossil fuels throughout Oregon's economy, with the exception of the electricity sector. So these limits, as I say, are mandatory, they're enforceable, and they decline each year. If we can go to the next slide, I believe that shows that decline. And so what the Commission adopted were, again, these enforceable limits on the use of fossil fuels and the resultant emissions from them, and they decline each year down toward two milestones. In 2035, a 50% reduction, and then by 2050, a 90% reduction. And those were reductions from roughly the present level, the 3 years leading into this rulemaking, for which we had greenhouse gas emissions data. So I think it was a 2017, 18, and 19 3-year period that was the baseline for this program. So those reduction levels, you see they're graphed. And if you look closely, you'll see a couple little hitches, just in case folks were wondering why those little hitch marks instead of just a straight line between those milestones I mentioned. And that's because the Commission also adopted rules that phase in the companies that are regulated by this program. And I'm going to hand it over to Nicole here in the next slide to talk about one particular type of company that is a question here. But the Commission adopted rules that phase in the size of fuel suppliers that are regulated by the program, starting off at a fairly high threshold, and every 3 years, really cutting in half that threshold down to a very low one by the 12th year of the program, in which we can say at that threshold, again, essentially all fossil fuels are regulated by this program, again, with that exception of the electricity sector. And with that, I believe I'm going to hand it over to Nicole to really dive into the proposal at hand.
Thanks again, Colin. I just want to double check. Can everyone hear me? Okay, great. So as Colin said, we did want to take a step back and just once again remind folks that we use all that very specific language in the rule itself. So you'll see throughout the rule this term covered entities. That's essentially the companies that are being regulated by the Climate Protection Program. So we have 3 categories of covered entities in the program. 2 of them we call our covered fuel suppliers. Those are our natural gas utilities, but if you're reading the rule, you're going to see local distribution companies. But folks understand the local distribution companies are essentially our 3 natural gas. We have the suppliers of fuels other than natural gas, so these are our folks bringing in our liquid fuels like gasoline and diesel. And we also have a part of the program which focuses on covered stationaries. What we are talking about today in today's temporary rulemaking that we're proposing to the EQC, it applies to the local distribution company. So we are talking about our natural gas utilities and their obligations under. Go to the next slide. So we're going to dive into some of this rule language, but I also want to just point out that, again, the language that we use in the rule is covered emissions. Again, covered emissions are essentially the greenhouse gas emissions that are being regulated under the Climate Protection Program. We have our covered entities, those are the companies that are being regulated, and then we have our covered emissions, which are the GHG emissions that they're obligated to reduce under the program. So while we're having a temporary rulemaking today, and I'll just say this as the headline, and then we'll definitely spend some time walking through this. But really the purpose behind our proposed temporary rule today is we do think there's a portion of the rule that applies to covered emissions for our local distribution utilities, again, our natural gas utilities. And we do think that there needs to be additional clarification in the rule to make sure that we are all in agreement about what are their covered emissions and what GHG emissions they are supposed to be reduced. So I'm going to walk through that. We're going to walk through that, and we're all going to have to dig into some information about different types of natural gas processes. But right in front of us at the beginning, this is the rule that we are going to be talking about today. So it's 34271. It's Rule 110, And up here, there's more information in the staff report, but this is really the most important part of what we're proposing to talk about today. So you'll see essentially what this is what are the covered emissions for our local distribution companies, our natural gas utilities. And basically the Part A says, you're responsible for GHG emissions that are from the use of fossil fuels throughout the state if that fossil fuel is natural gas that's been supplied by utilities. But under B, what you see it's written as covered emissions do not include, but you can think of this as exemptions to covered emissions. So things that our natural gas utilities are not responsible for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. You can see here some of the things that maybe Colin had mentioned. Roman numeral 4, that emissions from natural gas delivered to an air contamination source. That's really talking about the electricity sector. So as we said, there's no obligations under this program for utilities when it comes to natural gas for the electricity sector. There's also, you can see in the first Roman numeral, emissions that are from the combustion of biomass-derived fuels. As we have discussed, biofuels, biomethane, RNG, those are actually ways in which our natural gas utilities can comply with the program. That's a way for them to actually reduce their greenhouse gas. And then you'll see what we have bolded in red. I think my eyesight's not great with my glasses. I think it's 3I, Roman numeral 3. And that's emissions that result from non-combustion related processes that use natural gas as determined by DEQ. Now that's a mouthful, so we're going to walk through a little bit about why that is there, but I did want the commission to understand that that really is the language today that we are proposing an amendment to. I'm going to ask Stephanie to go to the next slide. So I did want to talk through different processes that use natural gas. I would say even for us at DEQ, for staff, we're learning a lot of this too. There's a lot of different processes that are using natural gas across different types of facilities in the state of Oregon. But I think the first picture you see here is basically combustion of natural gas. So you have natural gas, it's combusted, as we know, that releases greenhouse gas emissions. I'm going to ask Stephanie to go to the next slide. And in this is pretty clear, these are covered emissions for our local distribution companies. These are the type of GHG emissions that we're actually asking our covered entities to be reducing as part of the climate protection. Go to the next slide, please. Now, when DEQ staff was investigating how natural gas is used in different ways across the state, we did discover one facility in the state that was using natural gas. Our understanding was it was a non-combustion process, the way they were using natural gas. It's actually considered an oxidation process. But in this case, what we learned was that the emissions that were resulted from this process, this use of natural gas, they were not actually emitted into the atmosphere because the emissions and the molecules from the natural gas were actually captured and stored. And in this case, they were captured and stored in a product. So once we learned that information, we actually, and I'm going to have Stephanie go to the next slide, we actually wrote that language that I just referred to before, that Roman numeral 3, because we actually determined, we thought to ourselves, well, if there's not actually going to be GHG emissions that are released into the atmosphere through this process, this should be something that we could consider as exempt from the program, meaning there would not be compliance obligations for the program. So this information that we got from this facility, this was really the reason and the purpose that we wrote that exemption into the rule. I'm going to go to the next slide. Since then, we've actually learned about other non-combustion processes that use natural gas in the state, and these are also oxidation processes. But to the best of our knowledge and our understanding, these processes, these oxidation processes, these non-combustion processes, they actually do result in the release of greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere. Again, almost identical to as if that natural gas had been combusted. So what we learned in this process is, again, that GHG emissions are actually going into the atmosphere. And so I'm just going to ask Stephanie to go to the next slide. And so what we are coming to the commission today is we actually do want to make an amendment to that language to make sure that we're absolutely clear that these types of emissions are actually going to be covered emissions for our local distribution companies. Again, our point is the emissions are going into the atmosphere, but we do recognize that the language that we just referred to earlier is not clear and could be confusing and potentially could make it seem as if these emissions are not covered emissions. I'll go to the next slide. So the reason we are coming to you today with a temporary rule instead of a permanent rule, which folks are probably more used to, is we actually think this is a change that needs to be done immediately. So we think this is an immediate need, and we actually do believe this is a serious prejudice. So I'm just going to walk through a little bit why we think there's serious prejudice and why we think there's immediate need. I think we think failing to act promptly will result in serious prejudice to the interest of our local distribution companies and also other companies, other customers who are contemplating business investments in these types of processes. I think everyone can agree it's absolutely critical for our local distribution companies, for our natural gas utilities, to have a clear understanding of their obligations under this program, and then for them to know what is their covered emissions. That's critically important for them to make the right types of business decisions, the right type of investments, and they need to know that information because obviously it could potentially put them in a position where they may find themselves out of compliance, and there's serious penalties for them if they're out of compliance. It's also incredibly important for their customers who might be thinking about using these types of processes to understand that these emissions would still fall under the regulation of the Climate Protection Program. Because again, it does implement the types of business decisions they might make. And if they were to find out later that potentially these emissions were covered under the program, they again might have to realize that they didn't make a decision that was cost effective for them or the best decision for them. So those are our primary reasons for why we think there's a serious prejudice. The other reason I think I want to emphasize for immediate need is some of these, facilities that are contemplating these uses of natural gas, they are, submitting permits to us now. They're wanting to move quickly and planning to move promptly, and we could be implementing these types of things in early 2023, as soon as the first quarter of next year. So again, we really don't have enough time to wait on making it absolutely clear to these companies that these emissions are going to be covered emissions. I'm going to go to the next slide. This was a temporary rulemaking process, but I think the commission knows, and definitely us at DEQ, we know just how critically important public comment was to the development of the Climate Protection Program. There was so much in the Climate Protection Program's design that was heavily influenced by what the public told us. So even though this was a temporary rulemaking, we did want to have public comment, and we are very grateful that we received quite a lot of public comment. So we did have a public meeting on October 24th. We also asked folks to provide public comment to us by October 31st. I think we had about over 90 people participate at that public meeting. We had 13 individuals actually give public comment to us at the meeting, and we received about 132 written comments. So we received over 140 comments in total. Again, I can't do justice to every single person's comment, and those are available on the website. There are also links in materials. But there are some main themes that we took from the public comment. I think the overall main theme we heard is a significant majority of folks told us, yes, you need to do this and you need to do this now. You need to be clear that these are covered emissions. You need to be clear that, GHG emissions that are released into the atmosphere as a result of the use of fossil fuels are clearly covered emissions under the program. And you need to make sure that your covered entities actually understand their obligations under the program. We did have several folks comment that they actually thought the temporary rulemaking was not needed because they believe that that language we have right now does allow DEQ enough discretion to say that these emissions should be covered emissions and they're not exempt under the program. We did receive some comments who thought, well, you do have the ability, like, you know, yes, we understand it's maybe not clear, but we think that maybe you have enough of an ability to make sure these are not exempted. I think, again, you heard from us, we think the clarity is critically important. You know, and I think we also think, well, if one company decides, oh, yes, we're making decisions based on the fact that we think these aren't covered emissions. And another company says, well, we're making decisions that it isn't covered emissions. We're actually, in some respects, making it not easy for them. We're almost kind of disadvantaging one company against another, even though, because they're understanding the information differently. So again, I think we believe it's really critical that we make the clarification immediately. And then another round of comments that we received really raised a concern around some of the language that we initially proposed at this public meeting. And so I should just say, once again, we did learn a lot from a public meeting, and once again, what we started with is not where we ended with because of what we heard from the public. So we did receive comments that pointed out to us that some of the initial language that we had used in discussing us with the public actually potentially could have unintentionally limited some of the innovative approaches to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, which we have talked about as a way for our utilities and others covered entities to reduce their emissions. Specifically, there was concern that a little bit of the language that we had written for the public meeting would inadvertently look like we were preventing or blocking carbon capture and storage. And again, I think we've all talked about the fact that as that technology develops, we actually do think that is a way in which our natural gas utilities and other covered entities could reduce their covered emissions. So again, that was a learning for us, and we realized that's not something that we wanted to do. And so we did actually make adjustments to the language, and you'll actually see that that's something that we wanted to address in the language that we present to you today. I'm going to ask Stephanie to go to the next slide. So what we have here in front of us is a red line of the old language and also the new language that we are proposing to replace. I think the one thing I would say is, if you notice in the change, which I'll probably read out loud, is we're shifting away from the process, and we're talking more about the fact, like, are emissions avoided? You know, have emissions been avoided? Because as I said, that's really the crux of this. Are GHG emissions being put out into the atmosphere, or are they not being put out in the atmosphere? So what we have proposed in this new language for this proposed rule is that emissions avoided where the use of natural gas results in greenhouse gas emissions captured and stored, if sufficiently documented by information provided by DEQ. So again, if we have information that allows us to determine that emissions have been avoided, because instead of going out into the atmosphere, they're now captured and stored, we could decide at DEQ that we would say these emissions are exempt under the program, and for a natural gas utility, they would not have emissions obligations. If we don't have that information, then yes, they would be covered emissions, and they would have to be, there would be an obligation for our utility to find that natural gas.
Nicole, if I could just jump in and
Yeah.
clarify one thing for the record. The language is, if sufficiently documented by information provided to DEQ, not by DEQ.
I need my glasses. But I'm going to go to the next slide, I think, Stephanie, but I think really the next slide is just our recommendation to the EQC, and I know we have proposed motion language. It is here in front of the screen. I didn't know if we wanted to stop here for questions now. I do think we have to make a determination by what we mean is captured and stored, because it is important for us to know, okay, what does it mean to be captured and stored? It hasn't directly been emitted into the atmosphere. I do think that based on that language, that is why we do need to have the information provided by us, to us, as Colin said, and we would have to look at that information to make a determination if we thought we could say these are not covered emissions.
Yeah, thanks, Nicole. And I think for the time being, we believe this language affords us the flexibility to make a determination case by case based on the information provided to us. I do also think this is an area where a lot of policy development and really and scientific analysis is coming to bear. I think there will be more language proposed to the commission in the future, perhaps not even just in this program, but in regards into this area of how to handle CCS, carbon capture and storage. We're not the only jurisdiction grappling with this. This technology is beginning to show up, if not here in Oregon, elsewhere. So I think for the time being, affording ourselves the flexibility to make a case-by-case determination it is appropriate. Down the road, my hope and my expectation is that there will be more specificity in our relevant rules, again, not just probably for this program, around this area of carbon capture and how to handle it.
Sam, I can't hear anything from you guys at the table, so were you pointing at me?
I was seeing your, Commissioner Addington, I was seeing your hand. Is that what you were raising your hand to say?
Yeah, I had a question.
Yeah, we'll take your question after Commissioner Kyle.
Oh, okay. So on slide 8, you talk about the kind of breaking that into 3. Versus the and also, can you give an example?
The hot potato, because neither of us are chemists, and there are folks on my team that could walk through the chemistry in detail, and we can follow up with the commission with an explanation of the exact chemical process. It is quite different chemistry. The result from a greenhouse gas emission standpoint, as Nicole mentioned, is the same between combustion and oxidation. It does emit greenhouse gases in the same amount, whether it's combusted or oxidized. The distinction here is that in one case that we're aware of, those emissions are captured, the oxidation process results in emissions, but those emissions are captured and stored within a product. In this case, it's a fertilizer that's manufactured in northwestern Oregon, and those emissions are captured and stored in that fertilizer. In other oxidation processes, those emissions are not captured, and they are emitted, again, in equal amounts as if it had been combusted. So my apologies, I can't explain exactly what the chemistry is and how it differs. The important part is that it results in the same greenhouse gas emissions. It's actually a very clean process from other pollutants. For other pollutants, criteria pollutants are nearly non-existent from an oxidation process, but the greenhouse gas emissions, the CO2, are the same. And it's just the distinction between the scenario 2 and the scenario 3 here is that in scenario 2, the example being the fertilizer manufacturer captures those emissions, stores them in that fertilizer that they then sell in the global marketplace. The third example is where that oxidation occurs, but there is no capture of those emissions, and they are emitted into the atmosphere.
Yeah, and I would just add on to what Colin said. Thank you, Colin, because we were just both like, okay, chemistry. But an example, I think, that if you want an actual example of an operation, that's the third bucket. It would be like a fuel cell technology where natural gas is being used as the feedstock into that fuel. So that's not a combustion process, it's an oxidation process. So that's an example of an operation that would be in the third bucket.
Is that me, Sam? Thanks. I actually, can you guys hear me okay?
Commissioner Addington? Yes, we can.
Yes, we can, Commissioner.
Okay. I actually think, I don't even know what Molly's question was, but I think you might have just answered my question a little bit. The original reason for the exemption, is that still exempt? I think I just heard you say yes, but that's one question. Is it, does this change it? Does this language change, alter that original industry's exemption at all? And then the second part of the question is the information that is required by DEQ to analyze whether or not an industry should be exempt. Is that fairly straightforward? I mean, is that, they can just show you whether it results in emissions or not, and you guys analyze whether that's true or not?
I take the.
You don't need to restate that.
Thank you for the questions, Commissioner. I think for the first question, it does not change the exemption, so you are correct. For that second process that we talked about, those emissions would still be exempt emissions under the program, so there wouldn't be covered emissions for that. So you are correct in that. And I think for the second question, we do rely on our GHG reporting program emissions, and I should be clear that multiple types of entities report to the greenhouse gas reporting program. So we were actually trying to be as broad as we could, saying that we would take information that's provided to us. It could be that some of that information is actually being provided by a different party than necessarily the actual regulated utility, but whatever information that we have and whatever information that's provided to us, we would use that information to help make this determination.
Yeah, thank you, Nicole. And if I would add that I think the key point there, Commissioner Addington, is that the covered entity in question in all of these circumstances is that natural gas utility that Nicole was walking us through. The important point here is that natural gas utility does not have to be the entity that knows the information, reports the information to us. In this case that we've described, that fertilizer manufacturer reports to our greenhouse gas reporting program a great amount of detail on how they're using natural gas multiple different ways, one of which is in this oxidation process that then captures those emissions and stores them. That fertilizer manufacturer already has a reporting relationship with the agency and reports that information, and we can make a determination based on the information that the fertilizer manufacturer provides directly to us as to whether what emissions associated with the natural gas supplied to that facility are covered at that utility. So again, I think the importance here is that the utility doesn't have to have that doesn't have to reach in and inquire with every one of their customers, hey, are you capturing any of these emissions that I'm supplying to you? Those facilities already have a direct reporting relationship with the agency and have every incentive to report that information to us to avoid having any compliance obligations, to avoid as much as possible any compliance cost obligations from their gas utility being passed through to them in their gas rates that they pay.
Thank you.
Commissioner Schlesser.
Just a follow-up on that. So, you anticipate that new entities will be
Yes, Commissioner Schlesser's question for the record was whether any new entities would similarly report directly to, new entities with an oxidation process like this would report directly to the agency in the same manner as I described previously for the existing fertilizer manufacturer. And for the most part, Commissioner Schlesser, yes, our reporting program has actually quite a low emissions threshold as far as who is subject to it. And so it would have to be a very small, like individual household scale or maybe a little larger to be below that reporting threshold. So, and we have not heard of any uses like this at anything like that scale. These are large industrial, institutional scale facilities that are well over that threshold. Yes, that they would be required to report that same and again, have every incentive to report that information to us so that we could make that determination that those emissions were exempt in that case.
I would just add on to what Colin said, and just as I said, it was that type of reporting data that we used to first draft this exemption, because it was, as Colin just said, it was looking through the data that was being reported from the facilities is what allowed us to understand that these emissions may not actually be released into the atmosphere, and then to figure out how that could work in terms of adjusting the emissions for our local distribution company. So we would be expecting any future folks to be reporting to the reporting program, and again, it would be on us. We are taking the initiative on our end to kind of look through that reporting data and work with our reporting team so that we can also proactively try to identify any areas where this might be happening.
Chair George's question. Go ahead, Kathleen.
Thank you. I don't know if this issue is one that can really be captured in our analysis of emissions right now, but in trying to understand more about this, I was doing some reading, and I read some articles, including one from EPA, that talks about, fugitive emissions from plants through the process of transportation and distribution, unintentional venting, unintentional leaks throughout, operational processes, et cetera. Do we or the facilities we work with have the ability to measure those or evaluate them from time to time? And does that play a role in this or not really?
Thank you, Chair George. I want to pause and ask a question of Commissioner Addington, which is simply whether he could hear that question or if he'd like that stated back.
No, I heard it good. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Great question, Chair George. For the most part, fugitive emissions are not covered by this program. Those, like you said, tend to occur, my words, not yours, upstream of the point of regulation that this program regulates at, and they occur, as you alluded to, sporadically, unintentionally, and often and in ways that are challenging to quantify accurately and enforceably, which is why programs like this traditionally do not cover those upstream fugitive emissions of methane that occur, like you said, along the transportation of the natural gas to the point of use, the storage of that natural gas in intermediate storage facilities. To your question as to can we measure them, as I said, there are definitely unique challenges to measuring those accurately and enforceably. By nature, by virtue of what I just said, they occur unintentionally, unknowingly. In many cases, not in every case, there are intentional blowdown events at compressor stations, and those we do. So we have occasional visibility into fugitive emissions. For example, at a permitted compressor station going through a annual blowdown event, those emissions do get reported to us. But by and large, the overall natural gas sector fugitive emissions are not as quantifiable. They are estimated by organizations like EPA, but not reported with the same rigor and being able to hold a particular entity responsible for a precise compliance obligation.
Okay, thank you.
I recognize that's a partial response, I think, to your question, Chair George. So if there's any follow-up, I'm happy to take that.
No, I think you answered it. Thank you.
Thanks, Vice Chair Barco. Alan and Nicole covered this, but again, this is a proposal for a temporary. So, for all temporary rules, under our statutes, they are only valid for 180 days. So we can expect a proposal for that amount. Again, the temporary change and the desire to do this now is to have obligations under and do that right away. And have businesses, we've had. So, that's the imminency. But within that 6-month time period to make this remain permanent, we would have to come back.
further discussion, and I'm making sure that, Chair George, you and Commissioner Addington can hear us. Do you have any further discussion on this item? We have a motion.
Vice Chair Brasso?
I see Commissioner Kyle. Oh, okay. Chair George.
I just wanted to stop for a point of order, just to make sure that everybody listening understands. I really appreciate you functionally chairing the meeting today because you are there where most of the people in the room are, and we're definitely having some audio issues coming in and out for Greg and me. But just for the record, we checked with Gary, and it sounds like it is not an issue for the vice chair, who is functionally chairing this meeting, to vote on this matter. I think it's just important to explain to any of our listeners that we've made sure we checked into that and it is not a procedural issue. So with that, I'll be quiet and let you proceed.
Commissioner Kyle. Commissioner Kyle will be making the motion.
Oregon Environmental Quality Commission for the interest of parties adopt the temporary rule amendment of the chapter, part of chapter Oregon administrative rules with the Oregon Secretary.
Do I have a second? For the record, Commissioner Kyle just read out the motion, made the motion. Commissioner Schlesinger seconded. All those in favor, vote by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion the motion passes. Thank you. Now, we're going to go ahead and take another momentary break before we move into the next agenda item, so we can figure out if we can tease out the audio any better, since we've got a long agenda item ahead of us.
Thank you.
Vice Chair, it's 2:13 now, and we are scheduled for a break anyway right now. I'm going to break until 2:30.
Let's do it. We'll break until 2:30. Thank you, Leah. Our new audio setup. I'm thinking, if you. You cannot hear me well.
Try again, Sam. Try talking again.
Greg, can you let me know, Commissioner Addington, can you hear me? Oh, they're not. Okay, good, great. Okay, I'm getting none. We're good. Go ahead and record. There's going to be a lag each time we speak, when we speak, and when either Commissioner Kyle, myself, Commissioner lag back to on the phone, whether that's George or Commissioner Addington or anyone. So we.
Hey, Sam, it's too far away or something because we couldn't hear any of that.
It's cutting in and out terribly. We hear about every third or fourth word. Should we try connecting by phone? Would that potentially help? I don't know.
Thank you all for your patience. This is Stephanie Caldera, Commission Assistant. Chair George or Commissioner Atkinson, can you affirm that you can hear our meeting room now?
I hear you clearly, staff. Greg's nodding.
Thank you. Vice Chair Barrasso, would you like to try the audio exchange that we discussed? For our members joining by Zoom, to note, due to some audio technical difficulties, we're going to have a slight lag in between speakers. When the commissioners are speaking, we will be muting a separate line in room. So with your patience, we will try to do this and have a little bit better audio for our participants today.
Thank you.
Vice Chair Barrasso would like to proceed. I will activate that now.
Give me Commissioner Atkinson, Commissioner George, Chair George, can you give me a nod if you can hear me clearly? Okay, great. This works. So, Stephanie, when you're ready, I think we'll turn it back over so the audio is on.
Yes, thank you. And thank you. This is Stephanie Caldera, Commission Assistant. This time we will turn it over to item C's speakers.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Vice Chair Barrasso, Chair George, Commissioners. For the record, my name is Ali Mirzakhalili. I'm the Air Quality Division Administrator with DEQ, and it's my honor to kick off the information session on electrification of transportation sector. So I want to thank you. I hope everybody can hear me okay. The remote issues are challenging. We figure we should have it down pat by now, but it seems to be not the case. So again, with me here, Amanda Peets, my colleague at ODOT. We have Kate Hawley on the call-in now join in, and my lifeline here. With any questions you have, Rachel Sakata is sitting on my side, and in case any questions come up. So with that, I just want to start with a little bit of background. The general impact of transportation emission on health, air quality, vulnerable communities, and climate are all well established here. Gasoline and diesel engines also have a disproportionate impact on criteria pollutant levels, like ozone, particulate matter, oxides of nitrogen, or NOx, which put some of areas of Oregon at risk of exceeding national ambient air quality standards for not only NOx but ozone precursors, that Portland and Medford areas are having. Data from our greenhouse gas inventory shows the transportation sector makes up at least 40% of our GHG emissions, and you've heard that, I think, in many different presentations from us. In order to achieve the state's air quality and climate goals, the state must move towards electrifying our transportation system. DEQ, in coordination with other state agencies such as ODOT and working closely with other public and private partners such as PacifiCorp, which you'll hear from, have leaned in toward a comprehensive strategy to address greenhouse gas emissions from transportation. It includes actions such as the governor's Executive Order 20-04, which directs state agencies to take action to reduce and regulate greenhouse gas emissions from transportation sector. Every Mile Counts, which is Oregon's carbon reduction roadmap for transportation and includes strategies for substantially reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Senate Bill 1044, which in 2019, which has a goal for at least 90% of new motor vehicles sold annually to be zero emissions by 2035. The Advanced Clean Car Rules, the DEQ is proposing for commission action in December, hopefully, that ensures that we will be able to meet the goals of Senate Bill 1044, and it represents an ambitious and vital step toward transitioning to clean air vehicles and a zero-emission transportation system. More broadly, transforming to a zero-emission transportation system. I think Stephanie can go to the next slide, please. More broadly, transforming to a zero-emission transportation system equitably requires a coordinated and collaborative approach. This involves the development of a robust recharging and refueling network, and implementation of a suite of incentive programs on the clean cars and funding for charging. It also includes efforts to ensure we are conducting the energy planning and investment needed to support this transition. Oregon is tracking the energy supply and consumption to support the transition from gasoline to other alternative fuel sources, such as electricity and hydrogen. EQ is working closely with our partner agencies and private entities to ensure a smooth transition. At this point, I'd like to introduce my colleague Amanda Peets. She's the Administrator of the Policy and Data Analysis Division, I get that right, at Oregon Department of Transportation. She'll talk about how we are putting the necessary infrastructure in place for the electric vehicles. They're also looking to ensure public charging is accessible to everyone, particularly those who do not have access to home charging. After that, we'll hear from Kate Hawley, the Electric Vehicle Senior Product Manager at PacifiCorp, who will let us know how they are investing in their electrical grids to ensure charging reliability and capacity. And with that, Amanda, please.
Great, thank you. So good afternoon. My name is Amanda Peets, as Ali mentioned. I am the Administrator for Policy Data and Analysis with the Department of Transportation. So I oversee our statewide policy planning work, research data, and also our climate office, which has a large portfolio for transportation electrification. So really excited to talk to you today about one of my favorite topics. So we'll go ahead and flip to the next slide, please. So I'm going to talk about transportation electrification. I use that term very purposely. Sometimes people say electric vehicles, and they really just mean cars and trucks. We say transportation electrification because it's more than just cars and trucks. It's the medium and heavy duty sector, the freight trucks, the transit buses, and it's micromobility, so electric bikes, electric scooters. So we are looking at the entire portfolio of transportation electrification as we look towards the future. As we look towards advancing electrification, we need to address 4 key barriers that are shown here on this slide. And so that includes the infrastructure in place, which I'll be mainly focusing on today, which is the charging infrastructure, but also the cost of the vehicles itself, awareness on what's out there, what charging is out there, how to charge, all those kind of educational components, as well as the data and information. And then lastly, equity. We need to center equity in everything that we do and make sure that as we're transitioning, that all people have access to these services in a fair manner. Of course, center to all of that is the regulations that often you as a body help to put in place. It really helps to set that vision for where we're heading as the future so that we can address these barriers in ways where we know where we're heading and what that endpoint is and try to get there and try to achieve that. The goal is to achieve it collectively. So the reason I show a puzzle on this page is that we all have pieces of this puzzle, and it's only going to work when we work together. Thankfully, we have a good partnership with the Department of Environmental Quality, but also the Department of Energy, the Public Utility Commission. We work a lot with our utilities across the state, and of course the private sector, both from the EV service providers, but also a number of other entities as well. So it takes all of us really working together. In terms of roles and responsibilities, ODOT primarily has responsibility over the charging infrastructure for electrification. We're working a lot on the light duty side, and I'll talk about that in my presentation today. We also try to bring the various groups together to have these kind of conversations because there are so many pieces to this puzzle. As you know, as the Department of Environmental Quality, you play key roles on the regulation side, but also on that cost perspective with your incentive programs. We can't do just the infrastructure side and not have the incentive programs to match those. So they go really hand in hand, and we work together a lot to just make sure that those align really, really well. Our partners at Department of Energy, they do a lot on the data and awareness side. So they gather a lot of information that comes from our DMV reports on registrations of vehicles and things like that, compile that together. They also look at the ability of the electrical grid to manage that new demand that's coming from charging. So that's an important and key component as well. Public Utility Commission regulates some of our larger utilities in the states, make sure that they're planning for these things and understanding how those kind of pieces fit together. And then there's many other partners that are key as well. Next slide. So this is a slide on Department of Energy has on their website that shows the amount of electric vehicles that are registered in the state of Oregon. So you can see as of July, right around 55,000 electric vehicles. I pulled the latest numbers just the other day. It's upwards of 56,000 electric vehicles in the fleet. So we're gaining at about 1,000 vehicles a month, new vehicles coming into the system. And actually, as you look at the last several months, it's more like 1,500. So we're seeing this ramp up really going right now where it's accelerating. I like my EV puns here. And we are the second in the nation, only behind California and tied with Washington for the number of new vehicles sold being electric. So Oregon is really there in terms of the precipice of electrification. Next slide. So now focusing on the charging infrastructure side of things, what do we need to support that? So Ali mentioned Governor Brown's Executive Order 2004, that was on climate. And one of the things that was prescribed in that is we do a needs analysis. And we look at Senate Bill 1044, which says by 2035 that at least 90% or 95% of new vehicles sold should be electric. What's the actual charging infrastructure that we would need in place to make sure that that's viable? And that's exactly what this TINA study did. We call it TINA, it's Transportation Electrification Infrastructure Needs Analysis, super long, that's why we shorten it. But that really looks at how do we get to those levels. The answer is it's a boatload more charging, official term there. So about a 5-fold increase just within the next 5 years on charging infrastructure. But I think we're well positioned to do that, and I'll talk about some of the funding coming our way and how we partner across with different entities. It also helped, the TINA study also helped to highlight the roles that we all play. So what is the private sector really good at doing in terms of adding charging infrastructure and utilities? And then where can the public side or state agencies play more of a role? So that we kind of understand if we have different roles and responsibility, we work together collectively and well, we're not stepping on each other's toes. This is ODOT's perspective in these kind of 3 boxes in the middle on where we think we are with charging infrastructure. So on the light duty vehicle side, cars and trucks, we're there. As we said, a lot of the vehicles on the road, so we are ready to deploy charging infrastructure. That's where a lot of federal funding has been focused on that light duty side. Medium and heavy duty, that's more emerging, right? There's some manufacturers out there, less on the charging infrastructure, but we know that in order to support those vehicles gaining in the market, that we have to have that infrastructure out about 5 years ahead of time. So that's soon. So we need to start investing now. So we're looking at ways with some of the NEVI funds I'll talk about later, and that's the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program that the federal government's providing money towards. We're going to actually add some sites where we're going to try to have a pull-through design, so you can have medium-duty vehicles at least, or heavy-duty vehicles in some cases, use those areas. We're going to try to put in higher wattage chargers or wiring for those so that we're future-proofing and getting ready for those vehicles to come. So we're thinking ahead there. We're also going to go after a lot of discretionary federal grants, and we've partnered already on applications for studying those in the state to really get that medium and heavy-duty infrastructure out there. On the micromobility side, I will say it's more opportunistic. A lot of the charging for electric bikes, electric scooters happens at home, or if it's part of a share fleet, that happens, as the provider goes and charges those vehicles. However, we also will put low voltage chargers in all of our NEVI sites. We plan to have those so that if somebody has an electric bike, they're going and they're touring around, they can just plug that in and get that charged as well. Next slide. All right, there's an embarrassing picture of me. So as Ali talked about, transportation is a huge emitter. Did you have a question? Yeah, sure. Absolutely, we have a map, and I'll talk about that here in a minute. So great setup, thank you. So we need to, some people might ask, why is ODOT putting so much money towards charging infrastructure? Part of it is we recognize we're part of the root of the problem. If you look at emissions, transportation is a huge emitter. So we have a diversified way that we're going to get there, which includes investing more in low and no emission modes like biking and walking, and how we price even the transportation system. But the majority of people, even if we double the amount of people biking or walking, we're still going to have the majority of people driving, and it's key to make every single mile driven clean. So that's why we're putting all this in. So we're putting in over $100 million investment over the next 5 years towards charging infrastructure. A good share of that, about $65 million, counting the match requirements, come from the federal government and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. The remainder comes from things like our lawnmower fund locally, that is when somebody is refueling at the pump, they're putting gas in a gas tank to refuel their lawnmower. That doesn't go into the state highway fund, that goes into a separate fund that we can use on non-state highway activities. So we're putting some of that money towards electrification. And that includes upgrades that we're doing right now to our West Coast electric highways that runs along Interstate 5, along US 101. We've had those for about a decade, so we actually have some really good experience with some of these sites. But then it will also lead to a couple new programs that I'll share with you here today. Next slide. All right, NEVI. We plan to have what we call Oregon's quad pods. So every single site will have 4 chargers there. We'll have at least 3 that are 150 kilowatt chargers, which are considered definitely DC fast chargers. And we'll have 1, hopefully around 350 kilowatts. And then that's also where we are trying to do the future proofing, or bringing the wiring in for a couple other high capacity chargers. These charging sites will be located every 50 miles, and that they have to be within 1 mile of the roadway that's designated, 1 mile of what's called a federal alternative fuel corridor. Next slide. So here's a map. Everybody loves a map. These are our federally designated alternative fuel corridors. This is kind of our deployment plan for the NEVI funds. So again, those funds are federally directed towards alternative fuel corridors, towards mostly light duty charging, although like I said, we're gonna add some medium heavy duty and some micromobility. But there's 11 alternative fuel corridors in total, which really will represent the backbone system for the state of Oregon. So you can see north-south, east-west, it really traverses and crosses the state of Oregon for some of those longer distance charging, for some of those rural charging. What this will result in is we'll double the amount of DC fast chargers in the state with this funding alone. So it will make some pretty significant investments out there. You'll see there's a dashed line along Interstate 5 towards the northern part. That means that there are some stations that are NEVI compliant today. That means that they're higher wattage, they're accessible, they meet all the requirements for the federal. So we're supplementing those stations in other parts. Generally what we're doing is trying to knock off about 2 corridors at a time and a whole corridor, so the entire system gets developed out. In the first year, we'll be doing Interstate 5 and 205 in the Portland metro area, and then US 97, and then in future years doing some more of the east and west routes as well. Next slide. So as I talked about, one of the great things that the NEVI, TINA study did, the electrification analysis that we looked at, is really helped to identify what roles and responsibilities are best for the public sector. So one is that longer distance corridor charging, where we can really create that backbone system, and the NEVI funding is helping us to do that. The other is a new program that we're creating called the Community EV Rebate Program. And this program is where maybe it's not as profitable for a private company to come in to an area because there's not a lot of EV vehicles that are in an area. So this might be rural areas, but in particular our BIPOC, our Black, Indigenous, people of color communities, and by multi-unit dwellings, and really trying to get these chargers within and embedded in communities, really trying to address some of those equity issues that exist, bring down that initial cost that's maybe preventing some of the private sector and even cities and counties from investing, and providing these rebates to get some of those chargers out there. We anticipate that launching around spring of this next year. And it's about $8 million we put there on the slide. Next slide. So in summary, there's a lot of investment being made right now in transportation electrification from the federal government, even from the state of Oregon and ODOT, as we're talking about here, but also from the private sector. And we're really seeing some big influx of gas companies investing in putting in EV charging infrastructure themselves. So they're seeing that transition. They're making some significant investments, which are great because those are in areas that often have amenities already, like restrooms. They're in convenience of our roadway system. So that's a great pairing with things. We're seeing major fleet providers, Daimler and others, partnering to get out some of that charging infrastructure as well. Like rental companies, Hertz, changing over their fleet towards electrification. So a lot of investments being made on the private side, and then a lot of programs that utilities are creating as well, that have local investments, whether it's the large utilities like PG&E, or it's some of the smaller areas like Eugene Water and Electric Board, all providing programs to get those chargers out there, whether it's in-home or often for small and commercial fleets as well. So with that, I am happy to take questions, or if we want to move to the next presenter and take questions at the end.
Presentation. I just have a question about the community charging program. Do you have any plans or strategies for keeping charging costs down at those chargers in addition to providing those chargers, which I think
Okay, so I think that's where the partnerships are so absolutely crucial and critical. So what we're doing is we're really just providing the incentive for the infrastructure itself, but as you mentioned, cost can be a continual barrier for the people using the system when you have use at peak hours and the costs go up. So the partnership with utilities is absolutely critical to make sure that rates are set in a fair and equitable way, that they are known to people that are charging ahead of time, so they can have that predictability and those kind of things. So we're working a lot with our utility partners on that. On the federal fund side, there's some requirements that the Joint Office on Transportation and Energy are looking at putting in place for cost control measures as well, and making sure that that information is publicly accessible and that it's not spiking so that it's unaffordable.
in EV vehicles being registered, showing that your technology is being adopted. Awesome. But we are also proposing to kind of turbocharge this with some of these new rules. So it's kind of actually, even with this planned infrastructure with NEVI and some of this TINA work, how certain are we that we'll have the EV charging infrastructure in place that would meet the needs of proportion of Oregonians that would be transitioning to this, especially if we start to adopt rules that kind of accelerate it? So it's really kind of the overall net demand, everything else. It's working as we kind of do this voluntary approach. So what happens if this gets to, we have enough? What about multi-city dwellings? That kind of stuff. A little more detailed.
Great multitasking here. So my short answer is yes, I have a high degree of confidence that the charging infrastructure will be there. Between many of the investments that we're making, even on the rebate side, we anticipate, increasing level 2 charging by about 40% again, just with some of those investments. And we still have around 20 million unallocated within that kind of scope that our commission set aside for that $100 million investment that I think will even further that number quite a bit and grow that proportion. So that's a proportion of it. So can we alone as an agency meet the demand? No. But I think to my last slide, in the huge investments we're seeing, especially on the private sector side, again, by even some of the petroleum and oil companies, having that transition, seeing the future within their stations and changing that, I think we're seeing that we're going to meet that demand that's out there. Even if by 2035, 100% of new vehicles sold are electric, it's a huge increase, but there's a huge volume of investment and implementation out there that I think can get us there. the key will be that equitable side of things. And so if I were queen for a day, I would like to put more of our discretionary money towards that EV rebate program so that we are really addressing those multi-unit dwelling needs. We've partnered with like City of Portland that are looking at plugs and the light poles and things like that to make it accessible within communities. So we're seeing cities and counties invest as well. So if we were to look across the state, it's a pretty massive investment that's going towards these things, and it's ramping up more and more and more. The key on timing will partially be the supply chain issues in some ways, the getting more and more companies kind of in the market and ready to deploy some of these things. So we iron out those details in the next few years. I think it will substantially grow.
If I have a follow-up question, do you, things are. Any kind of document. Needed. That's okay.
So excruciating detail, probably not in some ways. I would say, so we have some follow-up work from our TINA study where we're doing a deployment strategy, and that is really looking at the specifics of the where, the when, the how, that includes that kind of partnership documentation. So that's forthcoming. We're in the middle of that right now. I think from the national scale, you know, whether it's Atlas Public Policy Institute, Fourth Mobility, a number of other electric vehicle kind of advocacy organizations, they are doing some more detailed work to understand how all those pieces fit more precisely. In lieu of that, it is kind of individual conversations at this point. So my team is meeting weekly with all these different players, you know, whether that's Daimler or Travel America Centers or, you know, a number of different, Electrify America, a number of different entities to understand collectively how our plans meet. Governor Brown also, through the Western Governors Association, had led kind of a West Coast look at electrification and kind of the how-to of that to make sure that it's all coordinated and happens around the same time. So there's a lot of pieces that start to get at that. Is there one comprehensive thing that has all the details there? Not that I'm personally aware of, but I think there are a lot of things that give more structure to it than just the kind of informal approach that might be otherwise implied.
And you're gonna have to say this on the phone, but if Commissioner Addington has a question, so if you can cue it now.
So I don't, okay. Commissioner Addington, do you have a question?
Thank you. I appreciate this presentation. It's really interesting. I just have a couple of questions. The national EV study, the infrastructure study that has charging stations every 50 miles. Is that on those? So that's on those corridors on the map. That's what those were.
Correct.
And
yep, so it's 11 corridors in Oregon.
Okay, and so, and this might, the answer to this might be the community EV charging rebate program. But if you're in a place like Lakeview and you know there's a need or a desire to have charging there, are there opportunities? I guess I'm kind of wondering about the public-private stuff and you know, are there opportunities for private entities to partner to get these put in places that may not be on one of these corridors?
Yeah, great question. So a couple thoughts I'll share. So one is we can apply for additional corridors over time if we see that need. We're a little cautious doing that because we want to make sure that we're able to fully build out all of these corridors with the NEVI funding. Once they're all built out, you actually have a little bit more flexibility with how you use the funding. So we're also preserving that a little bit and just seeing how we move forward. So there is potential opportunity for the designation of additional corridors. As we build out, so I'm going to speak on the corridors and I'll speak off the corridors. So on the corridors, we're going to have what we call regional workshops where we go out and we meet with communities. So we're going to meet with all the entities within the area, whether it's utilities, EVSPs, cities and counties, and drivers, and underserved communities, and talk through and work through the placement of the stations along the route. So we'll do a lot of community engagement as part of that. If you happen to be a community that's not along one of these routes, certainly the eligibility is there for the community charging rebate program. So we do say rural in there. So we're trying to address a lot of the equity issues primarily for the low income and BIPOC communities, multi-unit dwellings, but there is some use of that for the rural communities as well. As we've done outreach for that, a lot of interest in particular in the level 2 chargers, which is what we're funding with these rebate programs. You might ask, why is that and not the quick chargers? The reason is tourism, stop and shop idea. This idea of you're there, you plug in, you can tour around the community, visit the businesses, and come back. So we hear that pretty loud and clear from a lot of the communities. So if any community is interested, we're more than happy to work with them and help them understand that program. We'll be doing a lot of outreach before we launch that program in the spring of 2023 to not only make sure people are aware, but also do some preliminary planning with communities. So some planning grants on like, how do you think about this? What do you need to do? How do you get ready? So we're going to do some of that work as well.
And one more, if I might. And then, so along these corridors, so every 50 miles, I mean, how do you decide where exactly they're going to go? I mean, some of these, you know, Highway 20 through to Burns, I mean, is it always on a public right of way, or is it exactly 50 miles?
Yeah, so I think there's a little bit of flexibility on the mileage. To get much flexibility, you actually have to go through a federal exception to the 50-mile rule. And a number of factors will play into this. So we're doing public-private partnerships, so we'll hire a contractor who's going to actually build, maintain, and operate these sites. We'll have a lot of regulations that go along with that. And then we have a lot of siting requirements that go into that. So those regional workshops will certainly inform where the needs are the highest, and we'll try to give preference to things like amenities, where you have restroom facilities, water, some of those kind of things in all locations. We may not have that in all locations. There still actually are some federal restrictions along adding charging infrastructure within our rest areas because we can't charge for it there, the use of it there. So there's some challenges with that I think we're working through at the national level as well. And then utilities are going to be huge in that, determining where we can bring that grid capacity in, and making sure that we're also making it resilient in areas where we might have climate impacts or extreme weather impacts, and adding solar, or maybe where we don't have any electric grid capacity, that we're adding solar or wind to power the stations themselves. So a lot of moving pieces to figure out where exactly they're sited.
Thank you.
Sorry, this is Rachel Sakata. So I just also want to mention that, you know, there's going to be a lot of money coming towards the Inflation Reduction Act. You're looking at $30 billion. Priority for local areas, especially cities, to build up this charging. So, you know, they've got to get this money out fast. They've got to figure out. Oregon's definitely going to on a huge chunk of this. Sure that we put charging access to rural communities where home charging may not be occurring. things like that. So I think there's really an acknowledgement of the charging needs. I think too, with the regulations that we're going to be putting, rules sort of don't kick in until 2026 model years. We do have a few years to ensure that we are building out this infrastructure. So Amanda talked about some of the things. Oh, sorry, okay. So Amanda was talking about, you would ask Amanda about some of the plans, about set plans. I think one of the other things too is, we have the ZEVI, we love our acronyms, we can't help it. And so, the Zero Emission Vehicle, Interagency, thank you, working group. And so you've got all the state agencies who are working together and also, talking to the utilities and things like that about what is our plan going to be? How are we going to make sure that we have a coordinated effort? And part of that is also included an action plan that lists out, here's what we're doing, because we know that there's a lot of things coming our way. And we want to make sure that we're doing it thoughtfully and that we're doing it in transparent ways so that people are comfortable with this transition to electric vehicles.
Thank you. I'm going to ask, just because I know we have one more speaker up and they've got to check their slides, and so I want to keep us, I think this is an important conversation. I'm glad this is happening, and I think there's clearly a lot of room for more of this dialogue to happen. But I'm going to turn, I think our next speaker up, correct me if I'm wrong, is Kate Howley. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right, from Pacific Power. And so I'm looking to you, Ali.
I am, yeah. Can you hear me okay? This is Kate Howley.
Joining by Zoom, so we'll need a little extra patience as we go back and forth.
Hi all, can you hear me okay?
Go ahead. Kate?
Can you hear me okay?
And I believe
Yes.
we're now ready for our next speaker.
So Kate, we have your slides up. If you're joined, please go ahead.
Okay, great. Well, hi all. Good afternoon. My name is Kate Hawley, and I'm the Senior Electric Vehicle Product Manager for Pacific Power. So very sorry I couldn't be there in person today, but I'm based here in Bend, Oregon. So excited to speak to you about where we're going with transportation electrification. So if we move to the next slide, please. All right, just a little overview of Pacific Power. So wanted to start off briefly today with a reminder of our service area and how it relates to adoption of electric vehicles and infrastructure. So Pacific Power serves over 600,000 customers in Oregon, mostly outside of the Portland metro area. Only 10% of our customers actually live in Portland metro. We serve over 200 different communities and mostly rural throughout Oregon. And also within these communities, we service key important connectors and highway corridors. This includes I-84, I-5, and 97. And all along those corridors are a number of vacation destinations that Pacific Power also serves. So needless to say, we have a really big role to play in transportation electrification from light to medium to heavy duty throughout the state. Next slide, please. So by the end of 2021, Oregon had, we saw this slide before, but Oregon had approximately 46,000 electric vehicles registered in the state. So customers in our service area are made up about 20% of that total share by end of 2021. We're now sitting at about 10,000 electric vehicles in our service area. This is made up of different model types, and most significantly are Chevrolet, the Bolts, Nissan, Tesla, and Toyota. And these all account for over 1,000 vehicles in our territory. So Multnomah, Deschutes, Jackson, and Benton County have the largest share of electric vehicles to date. And there's a lot of movement and momentum going in with other counties as well. Next slide, please. So just a little bit about the DCFC, so the direct current fast charging ports currently in place. So Oregon, as of June 2022, had 455 DCFC charging ports and just under 2,000 level 2 ports installed. Currently, 173 DCF ports exist in our service area. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see that's about 38% of the total share of DCFC ports throughout the state. And then the next slide shares a little bit about the level 2 ports that exist in our service area. So we have over 663 level 2 ports that exist in our service area, and that's just around 34% of the share of ports throughout the state as well. So pretty comparable throughout both level 2 and DCFC. So just shifting gears a little bit, I'm going to go to the next slide and talk a little bit about transportation electrification planning and programming. And this relates actually a lot to the TINA work that was alluded to earlier, and discusses a little bit how we're taking that work and actually adopting the methodologies put forth by TINA for us to move forward with the way that we do planning. So as of June of this year, Pacific Power began engaging stakeholders in development of its next 3-year transportation electrification plan. So this transportation electrification plan investigates the current and future EV needs of our service area, how we plan to address future load, provide programs to customers to support market transformation, and develop a comprehensive TE portfolio that will benefit all customers. So PacifiCorp anticipates vehicle counts to increase by 2030 to approximately 190,000 vehicles. This is significant growth over the next 10 years. Current EV load is about 1% of total load in Oregon, and it's expected to be about 2 to 3% of total load in the next 10 years, and about 10% of total load by the year 20. So folks may be familiar with what's called our distribution system planning process, but through that planning process, which we do every 2 years, we look at the feeder level analysis of how circuits are impacted by load. And a big part of that is the future of what electric vehicles are going to be on the grid. So right now, from that initial analysis that we've done this year, we can see that the grid currently can handle the near term, so the next 5-year impacts from the electric vehicles. And we're certainly looking to minimize overall grid impacts in the future with some innovative kind of programmatic efforts that work on load management. And that's like a program type called managed charging. But there's also demand response and other kind of technologies that can be enabled to support future potential grid impacts with increased electrification. Next slide, please. So just sharing a little bit about our overall goal and objectives. We are looking to become and continue to be a trusted advisor and support equitable acceleration of transportation electrification across our communities. To do this, we actually have identified 4 main objectives. One is about elevating awareness, really ties into, I think, what Amanda was saying. And that's really important, especially in our territory where awareness and knowledge is, I'd say, coming up on the curve when it comes to electrification and opportunities for vehicle electrification. Another is electrifying equitably. So as you know, our service area is mainly rural. We've gone through some mapping exercises with stakeholders and through, it's called House Bill 2021, which kind of defined our definitions of underserved communities and how we look at underserved communities in our territory. Through a mapping exercise, we identified that around 93% of our territory would be considered underserved. And this includes both geographic and demographic characteristics. So it's very critical for us to ensure that that there's equitable electrification in this process. And third one is about managing those grid impacts. Very important for us to move forward with that. We're looking at different ways to do that, from planning studies to tariff strategies and to actual pilots. And then fourth is around reducing costs to customers. And this looks at kind of continuing to provide incentive programs that we do already provide to customers, but expanding this portfolio. And I'm going to get into that in the next few slides, talking a little bit about what we plan to do over the next 3 years. So next slide, please. So this is a graphic of how we're looking at facilitating a number of new programs to market over the next 3 years. So currently, Pacific Power provides grant programs and rebate programs to customers to support adoption. Our rebate program actually launched in June of 2022, and this focuses on supporting residential, income eligible, multifamily, and commercial customers in installing qualified level 2 chargers. And we've actually been working really closely with DEQ on aligning this program and what that means for the statewide car rebate program, and how we might kind of connect customers from that rebate program into our rebate program as kind of like a one-stop shop, or do some cross-marketing or ability for the websites to kind of cross-link to enable kind of a seamless transaction for folks moving towards electrification. And so just to build on a little bit of what we plan to do is we're looking at offering a number of different programs to market starting in mid-2023, which is when we anticipate approval on our TE plan from the Public Utility Commission. And this includes a residential managed charging program that looks at load management of the residential vehicles. Also a public infrastructure program. So you saw NEVI, you saw the map and where that was going. We're looking to do kind of off NEVI, I would say. We're looking to support byways, state highways, travel destinations within our territory, and then underserved communities where we can own and operate that equipment and not be in the same kind of structure that, say, a private business would be in the way that they have to make their kind of return on investments. I think we're in a unique position to really put charging in areas like multifamily locations, especially on these kind of corridor connectors, so Highway 42, 62, all of these that are actually have no infrastructure to date. Another application that we're looking at is called EV Code Ready, and that looks at how we're going to support kind of the advancement of new construction and EV codes, and kind of aligning with the state policy, which is 20% of all new construction must be EV ready, but then asking folks to go above and beyond. So we're investigating this to see what kind of offer we can put to the market in the future there. And then we're also going to be offering a fleet market program, a fleet make ready program. So we have a lot of customers, a lot of interested commercial customers that are moving towards fleet electrification. And we're looking to launch fairly quickly upon approval this Make Ready incentive program that's a rebate program that pairs our current line extension allowance, which is an allowance that's essentially kind of a to the meter, if you guys are familiar with that technology or terminology, and with another rebate, which would be behind the meter, coming up with like kind of a very large incentive package of around 120, maxing out about 120,000 per project. So a pretty big amount for folks who want to move towards fleet electrification. And then finally, there's another grant program in there related to municipal and community grants. And this is really about the actual technology, vehicle and mobility technologies. So buses, actually supporting grants for buses and supporting e-bikes, and building off of some lessons and great programs that we've seen in the past from our grant programs moving forward. So next slide. So finally, you saw this kind of big portfolio. What does that mean? How did that come into consideration with TINA? So right now we're estimating over the next 3 years to spend between $25 and $41 million to support all of these customer types and sector types through a series of the program offerings I stated earlier, but kind of just like a mix of different type of programmatic types. What we did was we took that TINA model, we downscaled that to our territory to figure out what was the need in there for infrastructure and what was our role in that for infrastructure. So knowing that we aren't playing 100%, it's not our role as utility to install 100% of that infrastructure, just as like it's not ODOT's role. So there's a lot of different actors in that space. So we found out from doing that analysis that we have kind of this maximum guardrail of investment that's around 66 million. And this is what the Public Utility Commission is using to kind of determine if our portfolio that we're proposing is somewhat aligned with the TINA portfolio moving forward. So pretty interesting work that was done around that. We'll have a lot of that coming out in our TE plan if folks are interested in digging into that methodology. But I think I have one more slide. And so then the next question is like, well, how does this all work with what's going on with House Bill 2021, where we're going as far as renewable energy, and how is this all connected? So obviously, ultimately Pacific Power wants to see these vehicles connected to renewable energy to create the vision that all of Oregon is striving for. So House Bill 2021 really put the state of Oregon on a trajectory to aggressively reduce emissions and ensure this kind of equitable green energy future for Oregonians. So in short, Pacific Core had recently released like a short list. It was called an all-source request for proposal that was looking to add 3,400 megawatts of new wind, solar, and battery resources to our system, and also to expand our transmission system and ensure that we're able to bring on all of these new resources effectively. So essentially, Pacific Core is already transitioning the system, the current old system, into a more non-emitting resource. And by optimizing our resource portfolio, we're taking advantage of efficient market operations and expanding transmission to ensure access to low-cost renewable energy across the West, so we can see a path towards meeting these emission reductions of House Bill 2021. And just as kind of the idea of like every kind of place and role and technology has a part to play in this transformation, there's also areas where Pacific Core is investigating new types of technology, which includes advanced nuclear, which is a project actually working in Wyoming that is at a TerraPower site. It's actually a former coal plant that they're actually retiring and then be putting into delivering this new type of nuclear technology called Natrium. And so we're starting to look at innovations within our own systems to be able to ensure that we hit the House Bill 2021 targets and stay on that trajectory to become zero emissions. I think it's by 2035 or 2040. All right, next slide. That's it from me. So I'll take any questions.
Got a question here from Commissioner Schlusser, and I'm going to just acknowledge that it's 3:27. We have a public comment here scheduled for 3:30. So just tracking that. Looking to you, Ali, to let us know what we do. How many slides we have after this?
Thank you, Vice Chair Barrasso. I will try to be brief. Thank you for that presentation. It was really informative and interesting. I was curious if you are exploring vehicle-to-grid technology options as potential strategies.
Yes, so that's kind of under that managed grid impacts. So we don't have a pilot in place right now. We're actually kind of watching some of the more innovative pilots that are happening. So Duke Energy has a big school bus vehicle to grid pilot. I think it's over like 200 buses that they're currently looking at. And the idea is that the nice thing about their transportation planning process is that at any point we can put in a new application for a new program type. And so we're able to kind of augment that and continue to add to the portfolio. And it's definitely on the radar and definitely something we're wanting to explore and kind of learn from what other utilities are doing. PGE does have a vehicle to grid pilot that they're working on.
Commissioner Addington, can you ask your question, please?
Thank you. Kate, thank you. That was really interesting. I just want to know if I've got this generally right. If I'm just going to bottom line this thing, there's you know what the need is going to be, the demand from both a grid and a power supply standpoint. We're not there yet, but you have a plan to get there. Is that what we're saying here?
Yeah, so it's all kind of connected. So we do annual forecasting for electric vehicles. It's called like business plan forecasting on an annual basis. And then we have our integrated resource planning, which you're probably familiar with. And that happens every 2 years as well. And then we have the distribution system planning, which also happens every 2 years. And so we all use the same forecast, which is kind of these national forecasts. So Bloomberg, New Energy Finance, Wood Mackenzie, and AEO is another one. and we kind of downscale that into the needs of the state. So obviously looking at the advanced cars rule, advanced clean trucks, things that are going to actually kind of cause that curve to go a little bit quicker. And then we look at growth rates and apply those growth rates into our territory and what we've seen as like historical in the future. And then that all gets into the planning processes. So the way that I've been kind of explaining is that the integrated resource plan is planning for that future capacity. Like it knows what's there and is going to be planning for that continually. And as those forecasts shift, we're constantly updating them. And then for us, we're looking at it from like, okay, how can we continue to provide the customer programming to support this? We look at what that future revenue is associated with charging at the charging infrastructure we might own, also from the future load or the residential load on the system. So I think like short is it's integrated, it's a process. And I think we're like on target for sure over the next 5 years. And we're only going to be getting better as we start to see how processes play out as far as these planning mechanisms. And then as we get the charging actually installed.
Got a question here from Commissioner Kyle.
Okay, thank you so much for coming here and presenting to us. I really do appreciate your time and hearing more about this. I do have some big questions about just the underlying electricity. What we didn't talk about today, and I know time is limited, so I'm just going to go and say I would love to get more of this kind of presentation from the public utility sector in relationship to this grid. I think we have more questions because also, you know, in order to do this, we need not only just a safe and modern and expanded electrical charging facility, that all depends on a safe, modern electrical grid. And there are times where the electrical grid gets knocked out, winter storms, it gets turned off sometimes in high fire seasons, all of that kind of stuff, which if we're trying to now tie transportation into demand, the availability of electricity, I have a lot of questions there that I would like to explore in more detail and more time than we have now. So that's kind of, if you can come back, Kate, or if there's opportunities where we could, if there's opportunities where we could explore this in greater detail, because to me, this is all, it's such a cooperative effort here. I want to make sure that we all do have time to be able to talk about this, because I know I'm not the only one that has those kind of questions. So that was one request, either for Kate or other electricity grids to kind of do this again with more time. But maybe a question that you can answer in the time that we do have is, you mentioned kind of on slide 7 that you're anticipating kind of a 10% load by 2030 under kind of current projections, which is a big increase. And I want to know how that connects then to House Bill 2021 and the use of renewables, so that we're not just shifting greenhouse gases from transportation into the electricity sector. Like, how do we know that we're actually going to achieve net greenhouse gas emission reductions through public utility companies, and we're not just shifting this to building new natural gas plants?
Right. I mean, just to kind of probably just center around, I'm not a House Bill 2021 expert and how that kind of filters in, but I can speak to at least I think the alignment that's going on here, where it is causing this shift for the utilities to, you know, go to zero emission in the future. And so I think it aligns well with how we're bringing on new capacity, and then an ability to then tie that into the electric vehicles. So I think, I mean, my understanding is that House Bill 2021 would not allow, right, the building of any sort of non or emitting resource into the future. And so it's essentially been almost like a safe, safe failure in a way that like enables the fact that we will ensure that these electric vehicles will be tied to other renewable resources. But I mean, please speak to that. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just gonna add, so I think on the infrastructure side, more than just the utilities, but we're also looking at battery backup options, solar options for kind of going down with inclement or intermittent service. So that's one side. I also, because Department of Energy is not here, I'll put a plug in for the recently published biennial zero emission vehicle report. That was published this last month, actually a week or two ago. And it is a compilation of talking to all utilities across the state and understanding the electric grid capacity, the needs, the future looks like. So that's a kind of nice one-stop shop that has a lot of great data information that might be helpful. It's called the Biennial Zero Emission Vehicle Report, BIZEV. Again,
It's the biennial energy report. So the
okay,
BIZEV
sorry.
is next
Thank
year.
you. Thank you.
The BIZEV is next year, the biennial
Energy report. Thank you.
The BRR.
The BRR, yes. Yep. We like our acronyms.
I'll just add one last thing too. And, you know, the manufacturers actually are thinking about this. They are building vehicles, for example, Ford F-150, to where it can store energy and so actually can, you know, provide energy back to the house in case of power failures for at least a few days. And so manufacturers are planning this for many of their future model vehicles. And so I know the F-150 can do that right now. I believe the Nissan Leaf is also going to be equipped to do that. And so I think as, you know, the manufacturers are looking ahead, recognizing the load that's going to be on, they'll, you know, they're also trying to figure out what are some other battery backups that can, you know, help. I think those are just being factored in.
I'm gonna check in, with, Director Felden here. I know, and Stephanie, I'd like to check in first, I guess, with Stephanie to see for you to queue up folks for public comment to get a sense, and then we can see where we go with this conversation here.
And thank you. So for folks on the phone, our next item is scheduled as public forum. If you're interested in presenting comments during public forum and you are on Zoom, please press *9 if you're up by phone, or use the raise hand function on your Zoom reactions panel. We will check that queue and check back with the commission in a moment for that estimated beginner number. We do have one person in room who has also signed up to comment. So I will tally that, Vice Chair Barrasso, while I move the phone to Interim Director Felden.
Thanks, Stephanie. I just want to check in with Ali. Rachel, anything else on that presentation to wrap up?
We can wrap it up. Quickly.
Yep.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So I have 3 slides, that 2 of them we've covered already. I think one, I just wanted to thank our panelists here. Amanda, Kate, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate that. I hope, the last thing I want to leave with the commission is that, hopefully you see that we have a comprehensive approach towards transportation and electrification, and that we are working together to ensure not only there is adequate charging access, we have a resilient grid, and we have the steady energy supply, so we can actually do this. So when we bring the proposed rules to you for next month in December, consider how it fits within the rules that strategy you already approved. And I think this is, I don't want to go through the list that we have here, but you're all too familiar with every item here. So that's just wanted to weave it together. And I heard Commissioner Kyle's request, and hopefully that report that Rachel and Amanda pointed you to, that gives you the answers. But if we need to do more, we'll be happy to put another panel together. I think these are rich conversations, and we'd love to engage with you. So I'll stop there, and Chair Barrasso, I think we're done.
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Ali. Thank you, Rachel, and thank you, Kate. I appreciate the conversation. I know we just got to check in on the sign-up list for the public comments, so we'll move forward to that in a second here. But I think we can take at least a comment or two here from the commission, as well as Director Feldman, if you've got any. But I just want to appreciate this conversation, and this is clearly there's a lot going on here, and I'll share from my perspective. I'm certainly eager as well to understand more and be able to sit down and make sure that these conversations are happening. I think the question that Commissioner Kyle asked around sort of that detailed plan, and I know we made that's a hard place to get to, but at least making sure we're all in the room, because understanding some of those corridors, and I think where Commissioner Addington was moving to, going from making sure we have a robust corridor network to a robust community network, is key for folks to be able to not just travel long distances, but also folks that are living in multifamily buildings and such have the comfort knowing that they can invest in these and have places that they can charge and charge and have competition in charging rates, so they can do so in a way that is comparable with at-home charging rates, because it does still feel like it's a bit of a wild west out there in terms of the charging rates, and that is equally important for this to be viable economically for many households. And so I'm looking across the commission and as well to see if there are any questions or comments folks want to share or say before we move into our public comment.
And just project. Thanks, Vice Chair Barrasso, and I just also want to really thank the panel. I think this is a really important panel that we had today. I know for DEQ, we were really excited about this panel to kind of round out. A lot of times the commission and the public from DEQ's presentation sees DEQ's piece in all of this, but this is really a broad, not only state effort, but obviously the private and public partnerships that occur in this realm are really key. And I appreciate bringing in some of the information with regard to the infrastructure and the grid planning that we have, and also where those private partnerships do play a role. And I think we can continue to bring more of that to the commission to kind of continue to round out that picture. So it's not just DEQ's piece. There's obviously the regulatory piece and the incentive pieces, and then all of the infrastructure that supports those. So thank you very much to Amanda and Kate for joining us for this today to help round out this picture for the future of electrification in Oregon.
Okay, I think we're going to take just a moment here while we figure out how to queue up the folks for public comment. And so just give us about a minute here or two while we queue that up. That's good to go. All right, folks, thank you for being patient with us. We're moving now to item D on this afternoon's agenda, the public forum portion of the meeting. And so before we start, I just want to note the commission may not receive comments for proposed rulemakings where DEQ has held and closed the public comment period. For this meeting today and tomorrow, the limitation applies to Air Quality Division permitting program updates, Advanced Clean Cars 2 rules, hazardous waste rule updates,
and the waste tire rule updates. And so with that, I will turn it over to our commission assistant, Stephanie Caldera, who will provide some instruction for folks providing public comment.
And thank you all for your patience. Just wanted to confirm folks can hear through the telephone. I believe that should be all set now. On screen, you should see the prompt. If you would like to present comment, please press the raise hand reaction. That is usually in your reactions panel in the queue. Or if you're connected by phone, press *9. That will show me that you are ready to present comment, and then when you are presenting comment, we do ask that folks limit their comments to 3 minutes or less. You will see a green slide asking you to state your name when you begin. You will see a yellow slide that says 1 minute remaining. You will then see a red slide, 15 seconds, after which we do ask that you wrap your comments and we will move on to the next commenter. Vice Chair Barrasso, we do have one person who has signed up to present comment in person, and I have 5 additional people in my speakers queue. It would be your decision on how you would like to take that. I'd recommend, if possible, to take the in-person commenter first, and then we will move to Zoom. And if that works for you, I am receiving affirmation of that. So I would ask Dale Feek to please come to present first comment today. Thank you. I'll distribute those.
Well, only one.
Okay. Thank you. You may begin.
In here.
Yep.
That was a joke. Bad joke, maybe. I'm Dale Feek, Chair of the Washington County Citizen Action Network. Vice Chair Sam Barrasso acting as Chair. Zoom Chair Kathleen George is on the line. Commissioner Molly Kyle, Commissioner Amy Schulter, and on the line Greg Addington. Appreciate all your volunteer service as acting as commissioners. I have 3 points I want to make. Manage time here. Environmental Coalition members and Tina Kotek, that's number 1. Second is Director Leah Feldman's 20-page director's report, interim report. And third is chemical recycling. So the 3 topics. Governor-elect Tina Kotek held a rally at Revolutionary Hall in Portland November 8th. The Oregon congressional delegation, Merkley, Wyden, Von Michi, Blumeauer, and former Planned Parenthood President Cecil Richards all spoke. At the rally, I said in the microphone, I'm a strong supporter of Oregon's Department of Environmental Quality and the current 5-member Environmental Quality Commissioners. Early on, after Governor Brown was elected, she fired 4 of the current Environmental Quality Commissioners and replaced them with the commissions that agreed with the mission of DEQ. That mission is for DEQ to enhance the quality of Oregon's air, water, and land, and take actions that will not degrade them. Governor Brown also started Clean Air Oregon that you, Tina Kotek, said that you would support and also not fire the 4 commissioners who are strong supporters of Clean Air Oregon and the way DEQ is operating. I then asked her directly, do you agree with what I just said, Tina Kotek? Tina Kotek said, yes, and I will be reviewing the various state Oregon's committees and commission members. So welcome all of you for being still on the commission. So I worked real hard as other people did to make that happen, okay? And then also have an attachment to the email I sent to 1 minute remaining that I sent to you has pictures of those, and I gave a copy of that. You'll read Director Leo, anyway, she demonstrated her competence as an attorney and a longtime staff member at DEQ. Her report lets the public and staff know how DEQ is using the cloud of DEQ in environmental quality policies, regulations, and working with various industries to fulfill the mission of DEQ to restore, maintain, and enhance the quality of Oregon's air, land, and water. I'm just going to quit the rest of that. As evidenced by the Transportation Department that they presented to you, and coordinating with Department of Agriculture, that's great. Last thing, recycling. Chemical recycling has happened throughout the United States. There's one plant in Oregon that's in Tigard. You gotta be real careful. That's a fossil fuel industry that's creating a lot of problems. I'm gonna give you more information later, as it said in my written comment to you. Thank you.
And thank you. Today, our next speaker is Dan Sears, who will be prompted to unmute on Zoom in just a moment. And who should now be able to present comment.
Great, thank you. Chair George, members of the commission, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Dan Sears and I am the Conservation Director of Columbia Riverkeeper. I'd like to address the issue of Houston-based Next Renewables LLC's proposed non-conventional diesel refinery at Port Westward. First, I want to thank Oregon DEQ for its detailed review of the Clean Water Act Section 401 permit. Next left DEQ no option but to deny the permit because of its failure to answer basic questions about the design and impact of the proposed refinery and the 400-car rail yard. DEQ should continue to require full and clear information from Next as it makes a third attempt to obtain this permit. Secondly, I'd like to highlight that on October 27, 2022, the Oregon Land Use Board of Appeals reversed Columbia County's approval of a 400-car rail yard that would have served Next proposed diesel refinery. The decision established that Next rail yard is not allowed on agricultural land without a formal exception to Land Use Goal 3. Next has not indicated what it intends to do to remedy this gaping hole in its proposal. I should add that the rail yard is an emission source noted in the air permit. This decision directly affects Next air permit and other DEQ permits, which require valid land use approval. Because the reversal means that Next may have to adjust its plans for the project, it could also affect Next's third application for a Clean Water Act Section 401 certificate from DEQ. Next has stated that the rail yard is necessary not just to receive feedstocks, but also to receive other supplies and materials necessary for the refinery to operate. The refinery and the rail yard go together, at least as Next described the project to Columbia County in its permit application. LUBA's decision doesn't come as a surprise. Next's proposal for the rail yard sharply departed from its long-stated promise to the community for a much smaller rail footprint and not to bring in feedstocks via long trains into Port Westward. When Next proposed the expanded rail yard, this was met by outrage by the local community who saw it as a significant bait and switch, with potentially detrimental impacts that would compound the already significant harms to the refinery. DLCD also objected. DEQ should revoke the air permit based on Next not having a valid land use approval. It is important for DEQ to hold permittees accountable for bad land use planning and not to grant permits for poorly conceived projects. The basic reality is this: placing a huge new refinery complex, 1 million barrels of tank storage for fuel and feedstock, a 400-car rail yard, pipes, a 400-foot flare stack, and a hydrogen plant in the midst of tenuous diking and drainage infrastructure on liquefiable soil, requiring the filling of 140 acres of wetlands and impacts to water resources in the midst of the Columbia River estuary, next to a monastery, homes, and farms, and using as much frac gas as the city of Eugene in the process. All of this is very poor planning for a project of this size, a purported $3 billion investment. Even ardent supporters of renewable diesel should see the flaws in this plan. Thank you very much for your service to Oregonians.
And thank you. Our next speaker today is Carol Sweet. And
This
you
is
should now
Carol.
be able to present. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, this is Carol Sweet. I am the co-chair of Envision Columbia County, which is a citizen group here in Columbia County. And we were formed many years ago to deal with the oil train problem that we had in our county. And then just in 2000 and I think, I don't know, 18, we ran into Next. one of the things that we as citizens care about is preserving our Columbia River and not letting the whole area be run over by corporations. What we try to represent the citizens' interest, but we're pretty much outspent by corporations. Often when we have a decision coming up regarding Next, regarding any other corporations that are coming up, we can look at Oristar and find out who is going to vote which way, because the public servants in many cases are being bought. We even had a point recently where when the Army Corps of Engineers was hearing testimony regarding their environmental impact statement that they're working on, the head of the port said, we do not want you to look in your environmental impact statement at anything beyond the actual perimeter of the place where Next will put its buildings. We don't want you to look at the air or any other items regarding the environment. To me, and to many of us, we feel like we're in a losing situation. And I was really happy when I saw this group and I read your biographies and realized you're just real people and you don't have, I hope, Oristar accounts. It feels very much to us as if the corporations and not the citizens are making the calls right now. And every time we've come up with something that we think might be an issue, we are handily put down by someone that is being paid for by Next or by Global or by Koch brothers. So I appreciate you paying attention to some of this, and really citizens need citizens to talk to. We need people who are not beholden to these companies, because when it's all over, as it was in the one where Next started one in wherever they had, and they just walked away from the plant and left all that mess. And who ended up dealing with it? The taxpayers. Thank you for your attention to this matter.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker in the list has a display name of Brandon.
Can you hear me okay?
You should now be able.
Hello?
Yes, we can. There is a slight echo, but we can hear you.
Is that better?
Yes, thank you very much.
Of course. Chair George, members of the commission, my name is Brandon Schilling, and I'm a resident of Columbia County and a farmer near Clatskanie, where a massive new refinery is proposed. I'm an advocate for local, sustainable agriculture in our region, and am working together with my friends and neighbors to build a more resilient, sustainable, and vibrant local economy that can sustain farmers and our community. I represent many of these friends and neighbors today. For years, we have been deeply involved in and concerned with the development of a major new refinery complex at Port Westward. Houston-based Next Energy is seeking permits from DEQ to establish an intrusive new industrial impact amidst the Columbia River estuary and our farms. The setting at Port Westward is important to consider, with its deep, rich peat soils, good water resources, and experienced farmers growing a wide variety of crops and livestock. Nonetheless, everyone who lives in the area knows that these deep soils will liquefy in an earthquake, and the dikes protecting the bottomlands could fail there in the heart of the Columbia River estuary, an area that calls for preservation and supports the downstream linchpin for protecting and restoring salmon runs and other endangered species habitats. Therefore, the proposal by Houston-based Next Energy threatens Oregon's commitment to protect farmland, protect communities, and protect salmon and the entire chain of threatened life from spills and industrial pollution. Even broader, Next proposes to process unknown feedstocks into so-called renewable diesel. So-called because Next will use over 14 million cubic feet per day of fracked gas to produce its diesel product, and would also require a new 400-car rail yard to bring inland feedstocks from unsustainable agriculture systems that induce new land use conversions and contribute to over 50% of global greenhouse emissions. This could undercut Next carbon reduction claims. All told, Next would store over 1 million barrels of fuel and feedstock in a seismically vulnerable area protected by diking and drainage infrastructure that is both sensitive and already at risk of overtopping in a major flood. So we urge EQC to support Oregon DEQ in taking a detailed, broad look at the impacts Next proposed non-conventional diesel refinery would have on our community, our water systems and resources, and Oregon's transition to cleaner forms of energy. We appreciate DEQ's denial of a Clean Water Act Section 401 permit for Next, and note the Oregon Land Use Board of Appeals reversed the county's approval for Next rail yard, which should not be sited on agricultural land. As proposed, Next cannot operate without the rail yard. We also urge DEQ to make it clear that Next may not proceed with its project without land use approvals. In fact, their state permits should be invalidated, and they should not be able to apply for new ones until and unless they receive all local land use approvals. Thank you for your time, commissioners.
Thank you very much. The next speaker in our list has a display name of Janet Alt and should now be able to unmute to present comments.
Thank you, Chair George, members of the Commission. My name is Janet Alt, and I resided for 6 years at Great Vow Zen Buddhist Monastery, directly across the road from the enormous refinery complex proposed at Port Westward. The monastery serves a far-reaching community in the region and around the country, and it is an institution vital to the Zen community of Oregon as a whole. I'm also here to talk about Next Energy seeking permits from DEQ to establish a renewable diesel refinery and rail yard, although we seriously question the use of the term renewable due to its large fracked gas use, unknown feedstocks, and major local impact. As you've heard, the Land Use Board of Appeals recently reversed the Columbia County Board of Commissioners' decision to allow a large 400-car rail yard very close to the monastery, determining that the yard conflicts with agricultural land use goals and is not allowed as proposed. I'm here to urge DEQ to revoke or suspend Next's air pollution permit that relied on a land use permit that is now invalid, and urge you to not issue any additional permits until the company obtains all of its required local land use authorizations. It is important to note that the rail yard is essential to the refinery. The refinery cannot operate without supplies brought in by rail. This rail yard represents a major breach of trust between Next and our local community. When Next arrived in Columbia County, they promised that they would not use trains to bring in feedstocks. In 2021, they changed their plan to include this huge new rail yard and indicated they may rely on it to obtain inland feedstocks, which could include virgin seed oils from purpose-grown crops. This is vastly different from the picture they tried to paint of using waste products, and it poses a major climate risk due to practices damaging soil health, failure to assure sustainable regrowth of the fields, and all the associated carbon emissions. The local community called them out. We are very grateful to DEQ for their denial of Next Section 401 water permit. Thank you to the staff who took care to illuminate the discrepancies between Next's proposal and the potential enormous impacts a massive refinery, rail yard, and associated pollution would have on our community. If Next is ever able to resolve its local permitting issues, DEQ's ongoing review processes will be critical for protecting the Columbia River estuary that is essential to so much life and restoring salmon runs. Next would store over 1 million barrels of fuel and feedstock in an area that contains deep peat soils and ample water, making it especially vulnerable to seismic risks. Next would fill over 140 acres of wetlands while altering sensitive drainage systems that provide irrigation water to local farms. The Corps has stated that this is an unusually large, high-impact proposal and plans to release a draft EIS in early 2023. As someone who has spent countless hours helping to run meditation retreats in the area and connecting with people in the community of all different backgrounds and political approaches, I can confidently say that the refinery is at profound odds with Oregon values. We need clean forms of energy, clean water, and high-quality farmland. Please take great care in vetting this project. My community depends on it. Thank you very much for your time.
And thank you. The last person who I have in today's speakers queue has a display name of Jasmine, and who should now be able to start comment.
Chair George, members of the commission, my name is Jasmine Lilick, and I am a fifth-generation farmer in Clatskanie and would like to elaborate on Brandon Schilling's comments regarding Next Energy and why we cannot trust them with the Columbia River estuary and the safety of our community. Next backers have a disturbing track record. In Odessa, Washington, they were involved with a failed biofuels facility called Transmesis Columbia Plateau. When the market dropped for biofuels, Next walked away and they were sued for unpaid bills. Washington's Department of Ecology found a toxic mess in their wake that required hundreds of thousands of dollars to clean up. A few years ago, the Port of Longview turned down a major refinery proposal by the same backers, citing the company's inability to provide information necessary to show that they were ready to pursue the project. In 2020, Next president Lou Sumas was arrested on child sex abuse charges in Texas and fired. In 2021, Next reneged on its commitment to not to use train-fed feedstocks for its project. They tacked on a 400-car rail yard to an already massive proposal. In 2022, Next attempted to gain traction in the local drainage district. One of its major investors bought significant acreage and sought to gain a seat on the local drainage district board. He lost resoundingly in a local election. Then Next attempted to browbeat our local drainage district board into supporting the refinery and adopting changes that would give Next significant control over the flood control systems that protect nearly 6,000 acres of high-value farmland. The board rejected the deal. During all of these processes, the local community has spoken passionately and knowledgeably about the reasons why Next should never be allowed to take root at Port Westward. In public hearings, the majority of oral testimony has strongly opposed Next. In recent months, we organized a petition showing that a majority of votes in the drainage district of those not directly controlled by Next or the port would have voted to oppose Next deal with the drainage district. This is a major statement of community dissent towards Next. We share all of this with you today because you take protection of Oregon's resources more seriously than Houston-based Next. We understand that renewable diesel may have a role to play in some communities, but that depends a lot on whether it's produced in an equitable way with true waste feedstocks and using as little fossil energy as possible. Next fails in all respects. Why in the world would we hinge our energy futures on the plans of this untrustworthy group in this seismically vulnerable place and with a refinery and rail yard design that does not make basic sense, as demonstrated by LUBA's recent decision? DEQ's ongoing review of the project is one of the few safeguards our community has in protecting the Columbia River estuary from a poorly planned million-barrel refinery and fuel depot. Please do your part to protect the area that we call home. Thank you so much for your work on behalf of all Oregonians. We are counting on you.
And thank you. Vice Chair Barrasso, that was the last person we had in the speakers queue. On the screen, attendees will see again the ability, if they want to present comment, those are the prompts, either *9 by phone or the raise hand function in your reactions panel. And Vice Chair Barrasso, at this time, just giving folks a moment for that. Seeing none, no additional hands raised in our speakers queue today. So Vice Chair Barrasso, I will pause my audio here for you to step in.
I think over to you. That might just be it.
And thank you. We're just moving our audio system over to Interim Director Leah Selden.
Okay. Thanks, Stephanie. Thank you, Vice Chair Barrasso. I wanted to mention one item that's actually in the director's report for tomorrow, but it's all over the news today, and it's good news. So I thought you should know today. So today, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, FERC, has issued the surrender license for the 4 dams in the Klamath Basin for the lower Klamath River complex. And so
this has been a long-awaited, a long-awaited moment. And, yes, so the surrender license, really puts the project into the hands of the Klamath, River Renewal Corporation, a nonprofit organization that has been set up to manage the removal of all 4 dams. And you've heard lots of updates on this over, different commission meetings, but I just thought it was really worth mentioning today, since you'll see a lot of press releases out there. And the work of the KRC, this nonprofit, is going to begin early next year. This starts right away. And actual dam removal is to take place in 2024. So in terms of, a lot of things that take typically a long time, getting to this place of the surrender license has taken a really long time, but it also allows for action to occur within the next 2 years. And they expect the dams to be removed by the end of 2024. There are also in place now, this puts into place the overall settlement agreement, which also includes conditions around restoration and mitigation projects around the dams. And there are monies in place now through this agreement through OWEB to be able to use specifically for the areas around the dams to restore and mitigate those waters and the uplands. So I just really wanted you to hear this today. It's really historic. This is the largest dam removal project ever in the United States. And in terms of the salmon restoration expected, over 400 miles of streams where salmon historically ran, and less than 5% of the historic salmon runs are happening today in terms of the number of species. So this is really critical to restoring salmon in this area, and it's the biggest salmon restoration project in the country to date. So very exciting and very important to all of the tribal nations in the area that rely on salmon, not only for food, but cultural traditions, and really important for all the communities in the area to restore that water quality for all the different uses. So, so there's, the work is now to come, but today launches that work. So be aware of that. You'll see there are lots of press releases out there, quotes from Oregon and California's governors, as well as many tribal councils. That's all. I just wanted you to have that small piece of the director's report today, and we will certainly do the rest of the director's report.
And so it's certainly something to celebrate, and we'll have our moments. So with that, I would like to see if there's a motion to recess until tomorrow.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, got a motion from Commissioner Kyle and a second from Commissioner Schlesinger. With that, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Thank you all. Thank you for joining us this afternoon, and we will see you all tomorrow morning.
And thank you all for joining us today for the EQC meeting. We will now close the Zoom and our recording. And please join us for the EQC meeting. Easiest access is through Zoom. And thank you all for your patience with our audio today. Thank you and have a great afternoon.